Welcome back to the Lazy Nook. I'm Francesca, and today I'm going to be reading more tales out of the classic collection of fairy tales from the brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen. We're going to start with the Emperor and the Nightingale. Long ago, the great empire of China had a mighty emperor. His magnificent palace was built of fragile porcelain and stood in the most beautiful garden the world has ever seen. Not only were the flowers exquisite, but the gardeners had hung tiny silver bells among them, so that they twinkled little tunes among the blooms. At the end of the gardens was a wonderful forest, and beyond the forest, the deep blue sea stretched far away. It was here, at the edge of the water, that a nightingale has made its home. Sitting in the branches of a stately tree, the nightingale each evening opened her heart and sang so beautifully that even the hard-working fishermen stopped their work to hear her liquid notes. Many strangers came to the imperial palace to gasp at the porcelain and the treasures inside. Of course, they were equally amazed by the intricate gardens and the trees beyond. But every visitor who heard the song of the nightingale could not help exclaiming, "Everything here is wonderful beyond belief, but nothing compares to the song of this magical bird." When they returned to their own countries, some of the visitors wrote books describing the extraordinary things that they had seen, and all of them ended up praising the nightingale's song above everything else. Now the emperor was very fond of reading books about his country, and he was especially fond of reading about his amazing palace and its grounds. He felt proud to be the owner of such magnificence. You can imagine his surprise when he first read an account that rated the nightingale's song more highly than all his costly possessions. "Why have I never heard the song of this bird, although she lives within my grounds?" he asked his courtiers. "Bring her to me tonight, for I must hear her sing." The courtiers had never heard of the nightingale. They ran all over the palace, searching for someone who had heard of her, but with no success. "Perhaps the story in your book has been invented by the author, Your Imperial Highness," suggested the courtiers. "Nonsense," said the emperor. "You must all search harder." The courtiers were almost at their wits' ends when they had found a young maid in the emperor's enormous kitchens. "I have heard the nightingale sing many times. Then I go down to the shore to visit my mother," she said. "It is a truly wonderful sound." The courtiers insisted that the kitchen maid lead them to the nightingale's tree, but they themselves have no idea what her song would be like. As they walked through the forest beyond the gardens, they heard a deep, booming sound. "What a beautiful song!" they cried. "We have found the nightingale." "No, no," said the kitchen maid. "That is a cow calling to its calf." Next the courtiers heard a bubbling, chirping sound. "There, that is the nightingale," they declared. "How beautiful!" "No," replied the kitchen maid, looking at them in amazement. "That is a frog calling across a pond." Just then the nightingale began to sing. A ribbon of beautiful sound shimmered in the air. The kitchen maid pointed to a little brown bird on a branch. "That is the nightingale," she said. The courtiers were amazed that such a drab bird could make such a beautiful sound, but they invited her to the palace that evening as the emperor had commanded. The nightingale was astonished that she should be summoned in such a way, but she went along willingly to sing to the owner of the palace and the gardens and the forest and the sea. The entire court gathered with the emperor to hear the nightingale sing that evening. A special golden stand had been made for her to perch on. As the nightingale's first notes trembled in the air, tears rolled down the emperor's cheeks. He had never heard anything so beautiful. Everyone else in the room was equally moved. The little bird was a great success. After that, the nightingale had lived at the palace. She had her own golden cage and 12 servants. Twice a day she was allowed to fly around a little, but one of the servants kept hold of a silken thread attached to her leg, so she was never allowed to fly free. One day, a present arrived for the emperor. It was a mechanical bird, made of gold and silver and precious jewels. When it was wound up with a golden key, the bird sang one of the nightingale's songs, moving its shining tail. It was a gift from the Emperor of Japan. The mechanical bird sang very well, and what is more, it always sang exactly the same song over and over and over again. The real nightingale sang as her heart told her, sometimes happily, sometimes sadly, sometimes loudly, and sometimes softly. "This mechanical bird will never disappoint you, Your Imperial Highness," said the court musician. "And she is much more beautiful than the real nightingale." So it was generally agreed in the palace that the mechanical bird was preferable to the living songstress, which was just as well, for the real nightingale had taken advantage of the commotion to fly through the window and back to its old free life in the forest. Only the poor people, who were sometimes allowed to hear the mechanical bird, shook their heads and said to themselves, "No, there is something missing. That is not as beautiful as the real bird." A year passed. The mechanical nightingale sat on a silken cushion on the emperor's left side, which was a position of great privilege. But one day, when the bird was wound up in the golden key as usual, it merely said, "Kurr, kurr." The bird had sung so often that its mechanism was worn out. Luckily, the court watchmaker was able to repair the bird, but he warned that in future she must only sing once a year. Several years passed, and the people of China were shocked to learn that their emperor was dangerously ill. He lay pale and cold on his magnificent bed. The courtiers were so sure that he was about to die that he began to pay court to the man who would be next emperor. In the middle of the night, as the moonlight streamed through his window, the emperor was visited by fears and phantoms. "Sing," he began. He begged the mechanical nightingale at his side, hoping to drown out dark thoughts, but there was no one to wind up the wonderful bird, so it remained silent. Suddenly, through the open window, the emperor heard a wonderful sound. It was the real nightingale, perched on a branch outside, singing her heart out. As she sang, the emperor's fever mind was soothed and his illness left him. "Thank you, little bird," he gasped. "I don't deserve your help after the way I treated you. But now you must remain in my palace and sing to me every day." "No, my lord," said the nightingale. "I cannot live in a palace, but I will come of my own free will and sing outside your window as often as I can, and I will do something more for you. I will tell you the poorest people in the land are thinking and feeling, something that you cannot know, surrounded as you are by courtiers eager to impress you, but you must promise never to tell anyone what I am doing." The emperor promised gladly and fell into a deep, refreshing sleep. When the servants came at last to look at their dead emperor, they found him alive and smiling, ready to take up reins of power again. The emperor ruled for many more years, more wisely and well than before, but he kept the nightingale's secret to the end of his days. The Ugly Duckling. One summer day, when the wildflowers were nodding in the heat, a mother duck sat on her nest. She had found a shady spot and some weeds at the edge of the pond. It seemed to the duck that she had been sitting on eggs for a very long time. Then, one morning, she heard a tiny sound from one of the eggs. Peep, peep. A little duckling scuttled out of the feathers. All at once, there were little sounds from more of the eggs. Before long, 12 fluffy little ducklings were cuddled up to their mother. "It's lovely to see you, my dears," she quacked. "The wait has been so long." But one of the eggs, the largest of all, had not hatched. "How annoying," said the mother duck, and she settled down to wait a little longer. Sure enough, a day or two later, there was a tapping from the egg. First a little break appeared, then a little head peeked out. At last, a funny little bird stood in the nest. Well, the mother duck could hardly bear to look at the youngster. He really was the ugliest bird she had ever seen. He didn't look like a duckling at all. "I'll push him into the water," said the mother duck. "If he cannot swim, I'll know he is a turkey or some other kind of bird." But when she nudged the untidy bird out into the pond, he swam off quite happily. In fact, he swam so well, the duck felt quite proud of her ugly duckling. "Come along, my dears," she cried to her children, "and I will introduce you to the other animals in the barnyard. Just watch out for that cat." In the barnyard, the other ducks and the hens quacked and clucked in approval as the mother duck led her 12 little ducklings past. But when they saw the last duckling, they shook their heads and hissed and squawked. "What a horrible bird!" they cried. "He will grow into his feathers," replied the mother duck, "and I must tell you that he swims better than all of my ducklings." She shepherded her brood back to the pond. As the ducklings grew, they loved to swim and dive into the pond. They would waddle in the barnyard, shaking their feathers. But the ugly duckling soon dreaded the barnyard birds. They pecked at him and called him names. Every day it grew worse. At last a morning came when the little duckling could bear it no longer. He ran and fluttered as fast as his legs could carry him away from the barnyard. As night fell, he came, tired and hungry, to a wild marsh where little frogs jumped and croaked in the moonlight. In the morning, the wild ducks who lived there found a stranger among them. "We've never seen a duck as ugly as you," they laughed. "But you can live here if you'd like, as long as you don't get in our way." The little duckling was still lonely, but at least no one bullied him. Then one morning, as he swam by the bank, he suddenly saw a dog running through the reeds. All around the marsh, hunters and their dogs were gathering. The little duckling hid in the reeds all day, trembling with fright, as shots whistled over his bowed head. That night, he once again fled as fast as he could from the unsafe home. The weather was growing colder, and the wind was ruffling his feathers, when he came to a tumble-down cottage and crept inside to escape the storm. An old woman lived in the cottage with her cat and her hen. She let the duckling stay, but the cat and hen were not very friendly. "Can you lay eggs?" they asked. "Or purr, or catch mice?" "No," whispered the duckling. "Then you are no use at all," said the cat and the hen. At last the duckling could bear the unkindness no longer. He wandered out to the world once more. When the duckling came to a lake, he realized how much he had missed swimming. It was lovely to glide across the water in the moonlight, but winter was coming and the nights grew colder. One frosty day, at sunset, a flock of beautiful white birds flew over the lake. The duckling did not know that they were swans, but he longed to see them again. He felt that he had never seen anything so lovely. The days grew colder and colder. One morning, the poor duckling woke to find he had been trapped in the frozen water. Luckily, a passing farmer freed him and carried him home to his family. But the youngster was frightened by the children's attempts to play with him. As he clumsily flapped his wings, he knocked over dishes and made a horrible mess. The farmer's wife chased him from the house. Once again, the young bird was on his own. He struggled through the rest of the winter. But gradually, the days became lighter, the grass began to grow, and spring flowers appeared. The bird found that his wings were stronger, and he could fly swiftly over the water. One afternoon, he caught sight of the beautiful white birds he loved so much far below. "I must talk to you just once," thought the bird, "even if they attack me because I am so ugly." As he landed, the swans rushed toward him, beating their wings. The bird bowed his head, waiting for their attack. As he did so, he saw his reflection. He wasn't an ugly duckling at all. Through the winter months, he had grown up into a beautiful white swan. The other swans had come to welcome him. No bird was ever so happy as he swam with his new friends. Later, 2 children came to feed the swans. "Oh, look," they cried, "there's a new one, and he's the most beautiful swan of all." The Shadow. Once there was a rider who went from a cold country to a hot one. He could not go out in the daytime, for it was just too hot. In the evening, when it was cooler, the streets were filled with people. Opposite the man's home was a house that seemed to be empty, yet lovely music came from it. As he sat on his balcony one night, with the lighted room behind, the man saw that a shadow seemed to be sitting on the opposite balcony. "If only you could go inside for me and see who is in there," said the man. And when he got up and went inside, the shadow did look as though it went into the house opposite. The next morning, the man was astonished to find that he had no shadow at all. At first, he was worried about this, but after a few days, he noticed that a new shadow was beginning to grow. And by the time he returned to the home in the cold country, the shadow was as long as it ever was. Several years passed, and one evening, when the man was writing in his room, there was a knock at the door. Standing outside was a very thin man who gave our hero goose pimples all over. "I suppose you don't recognize me," said the visitor, "now that I have become so human. I am your old shadow. I have become rich and wise since I left you, but I wanted to see you again one more time." "But what happened to you?" asked the man in astonishment. Then the shadow described how he entered the house opposite and found that a goddess named Poetry lived there. Even standing in the hallway, I found that it was as though I saw everything in the world and understood everything too, and said to the shadow, "A great desire came upon me to a man, but I had no clothes or money. The next day, don't laugh, I hid under the baker woman's skirts and didn't come out until nighttime. Then I ran here and there, telling people truths about themselves that even they didn't know. They were so grateful and so afraid that their friends would find out that they gave me rich presents and fine clothes to see me in today." Then the shadow politely took his leave. A year passed, and the shadow called on his old master again. "Things are going even better for me," he said. "Look, I have grown quite plump. How are things with you?" "I still write my books with goodness and beauty and truth," said the man, "but no one wants to read them." "Listen," said the shadow, "I feel like taking a trip, and I would like a companion. Will you come with me as my shadow?" "That's crazy," said the man. "Of course not." However, the next year the man became tired and ill. "You look like a shadow," said his friends. When the shadow called again, the man agreed that a warmer climate would be good for his health. So he set off with the shadow and stayed at his side all the time, as a good shadow should. The last shadow and his shadow reached a spa where people visited to get better from illnesses. Also staying there was a princess who saw very clearly. "I know why you are here," she said to the shadow. "You cannot cast a real shadow." "That's nonsense," cried the shadow. "Look, there he is. I treat him so well, giving him clothes and food, that he has become almost human." So the princess talked to the shadow and found him very intelligent. Then the princess thought, "I will marry this man who is so extraordinary that even his shadow is wise." And she took the shadow to own her country. As the wedding preparations were made, the shadow said to the man, "Listen, I will give you money and a state coach if only you will always stay with me and never tell a soul that I was once your shadow." "Never," said the man. "You are mad." Then the shadow ran quickly to the girl, looking shocked and pale. "Oh, a dreadful thing has happened," he told her. "My shadow has gone crazy and thinks he is human. I have had to have him locked away." "It might be better," said the princess, "if he never appeared again." So that night the wedding took place. The shadow's shadow was not there, and he is never seen since. The Tinderbox. One fine day a soldier met a witch upon the road. "If you will climb into the hollow in that tree for me," she said, "you will be a rich man. All I want is an old tinderbox that you will find in there." The soldier had always wanted to be rich, so he agreed. Inside the tree, as the witch has told him, were 3 rooms. In each room was a chest of money, guarded by a fierce dog. The first had eyes as round as saucers. The second had eyes as big as windmills. The third has huge eyes like round towers. But the witch had also told the soldier how to deal with the dogs, so he quickly filled his pockets and hat with money. Then, picking up the old tinderbox, he climbed out of the tree. The soldier wondered why the witch wanted the tinderbox so badly, but she refused to tell him. "You can cut off my head before I'll say a word," she said. So the soldier did. After that, the soldier lived a wonderful life, with rich food and wine, handsome clothes, and fine friends. But in a surprisingly short time, all his money was spent. Now he lived in the attic room with only the stub of candle for light. One evening, the soldier felt in his pocket and found the old tinderbox. He thought he would use it to light his last candle. But as he struck a spark from the flint, the dog with eyes as round as saucers appeared before him. 2 strikes, and the dog with eyes as big as windmills appeared. With 3 strikes, the soldier would summon the dog with huge eyes like round towers, and the dogs were ready to do whatever the soldier asked, bringing him money, jewels, and other fine things. Soon the soldier was as rich and happy as he had been before. One day he heard that the king and queen of the country had a beautiful daughter, but that she was hardly ever seen. Feeling curious, he sent the dog to fetch her. As soon as he saw the princess, the soldier wanted more than anything to marry her. He kissed her and reluctantly sent her back to the palace. The next morning, the princess told the king and queen that she had a curious dream of being kissed by a soldier. At once, the royal pair decided to keep a close watch on their daughter. Each night, the soldier could not help sending one of his dogs to fetch the princess. It was not long before the king and queen tracked him down. He was quickly thrown into prison and sentenced to death. "If only I had my tinderbox with me," said the soldier. At last he managed to give a message to a little boy outside his window, who ran off at once to fetch the tinderbox. With the tinderbox in his hand once more, the soldier knew that nothing could hurt him. He summoned the 3 dogs, who quickly overpowered the guards and chased away the king and the queen, who had come to watch the execution. The people were happy to offer the throne to the princess, and she was happy to accept it, and the hand of the handsome soldier, whose face had seen her in her dreams. So the soldier lived happily after that, and the most pampered guests in the royal palace were the dogs, of course. The Fir Tree. Once upon a time, a little fir tree grew in a forest. All around him were beautiful trees. The sunlight flecked his branches with gold, and the wind sighed around him. But the little fir tree was not happy. He longed to be bigger. Time passed. Each year the tree grew taller and his branches spread. "Perhaps I will soon be cut down," he said, "as the biggest trees are each year. Then I will travel over the sea. How wonderful that would be." The storks had told the little tree that the largest trees were made into the masts of ships. Each year at Christmas time, some smaller trees were cut down too. They were taken into people's homes, said the sparrows, and decorated with toys and jewels. That sounded even better to the little fir tree, although that sparrows did not seem to know what happened to the trees after Christmas. All this time the fir tree could think of nothing but growing bigger. He was very beautiful, but he cared nothing for his lovely home and the blue sky above. All he wanted was to be grown up and gone. And of course, the little tree did grow. The very next Christmas, he was one of the first to be cut down. Down in the town, the fir tree was chosen by a very grand family and carried back to their magnificent home. How proud he felt, covered with candles, ornaments, and presents. But he was too busy wondering what would happen next to feel really happy. That night, the children danced around the tree and opened their presents. It was such a pretty sight. Next morning, some servants removed the rest of the decorations and put the tree away in the storeroom, with lots of old boxes and junk. Only the golden star on his highest branch remained. The tree was lonely in the storeroom until some little mice came to talk to him. They wanted to hear about his life in the open forest and all that he had seen and done in the great house. "How happy you must have been," they cried. I suppose I was," said the fir tree, "but I did not feel happy then." Some months later, when the fir tree was yellow and dry, he was taken out into the yard. "Look at that ugly tree," cried the children, who were playing outside. They stomped on his brittle branches and broke them. Then the tree realized how happy he had been in the storeroom, where no one had troubled him, but he had not felt happy at the time. Before long, a servant came. He chopped up the tree for firewood. Piece by piece, the poor little tree was burned on the kitchen stove. "How happy I was in the yard," he sighed, giving off little crackles and pops as he was thrown into the flames. At last all the tree was gone. Poor tree! In all his wonderful life, he had always been wishing for something else, and never felt truly happy. You won't be like him, will you? The Wild Swans. Once there was a king who had 11 sons and one little daughter called Eliza. They were beautiful, happy children, although their mother had died many years before. One day, the king married a wicked queen who did not love the children. She sent Eliza to live with a poor family far from the palace, turned the boys into wild swans. The years passed, and Eliza grew up to be both lovely and good. When she was 15, her father sent for her. As soon as she saw her pretty face, the wicked queen hated Eliza even more. She stained the girl's skin and tangled her hair so that her father, when he saw her, shuddered and sent her away. Friendless and alone, the poor girl wandered from the palace deep into the forest, where she bathed in a crystal stream and became beautiful once more. At night, under the trees, Eliza dreamed of her 11 fine brothers, and handsome and grown up now. The next morning, Eliza met an old woman on the path. "Have you ever seen 11 fine, princess?" she asked. "No," replied the woman, "but yesterday I saw 11 fine swans with crowns on their heads swimming along the stream." Eliza followed the stream to the sea. There she waited until sunset. 11 swans with golden crowns came flying towards her. Hiding behind a bush, the girl watched as the swans landed. When darkness came, each swan turned into a handsome prince once more. With a cry, Eliza ran to be reunited with her brothers. The princes explained that they lived in a country across the sea, to which they must soon return. "Oh, take me with you," cried Eliza. The next night the princes made a net of reeds. Eliza lay upon it, and the sun rose. She too rose in the air. The swans held the net in their strong beaks. After a long journey, Eliza and her brothers arrived at their new home. That night, the girl dreamed that a fairy came to her, explaining how she could save her brothers. "You must gather nettles and weave them into 11 shirts," said the fairy. "Throw them over your brothers, and they will instantly be free. But remember, until you are finished, You must not speak a word." How happy Eliza was to begin her work, even though the nettles stung her fingers cruelly, and it was torture not to be able to speak to her beloved brothers. But only a few days later, a huntsman passed Eliza by chance. It was the king of the country, who was amazed by her beauty, and he carried her back to his palace to make her his bride. Eliza tried to escape, but she could not speak to explain her desperate task. Besides, she gradually grew fond of the king, who gave her a room of her own, where she could work on the nettle shirts. The time came when Eliza needed just one more bunch of nettles to finish the last shirts. She crept out of the palace in the dead of night and went to a nearby churchyard where nettles grew. Unfortunately, the archbishop, who had always mistrusted her, followed her. He believed that her visit showed she was a witch, and he persuaded the king to condemn her to death. Alone in her prison cell, Eliza worked desperately to finish the shirts in time. At dawn, on the day of her execution, 11 beautiful swans flew down as she was led to the fire. In an instant, she threw the nettle shirts over them. Before the astonished eyes of the crowd and the king, the swans became princes again, and Eliza could speak at last. "I am innocent," she cried, weeping with happiness. The king folded her in his arms, while her brothers gathered around. Only the youngest still had a swan's wing instead of an arm, for Eliza had been unable to finish her work before dawn. Hansel and Gretel. There was once a woodcutter whose beloved wife died, leaving him to bring up 2 little children. After a while, the woodcutter married again, but soon after that times became hard, and there were often not enough to eat in the woodcutter's cottage. The new wife tried to make ends meet, but she soon became tired and sad. One evening, when the children were in bed, she spoke to the woodcutter. "We do not have enough food for all 4 of us. Let's take the children into the forest and leave them there. Who knows, maybe someone who will be able to take care of them better may find them." The woodcutter did not want to agree, but he could not think of another solution. Meanwhile, the woodcutter's children had been listening at the door. "Don't worry, Gretel," said the little boy, whose name was Hansel. "I know how we can find our way home again." The next day, the family went deep into the forest. As they walked, Hansel dropped crumbs from the crusts of bread he had saved from his lunch, hoping to follow them back again. But the birds soon ate the crumbs, and when the children were left alone in the forest, they were completely lost. Hungry and afraid, Hansel and Gretel wandered through the trees. Suddenly, they saw a wonderful sight, a cottage made of candy and gingerbread. But no sooner had the children munched into the house than a sharp voice shouted from the window, "Eat your fill, dear children, but you will pay for every bite. Ha ha ha." Before they knew what was happening, the children were bundled into the house by a witch who lived there. "You will work for me, sweetheart," she said to Gretel, "but your dear brother will be a tasty dinner when he is just a little fatter." Every day the witch asked Hansel to poke his finger out of the cage where she kept him, so that he could see if he was fat enough to eat. But Hansel held out a chicken bone to make her think that he was still just skin and bones himself. At last, the day came when the witch could wait no longer. "Stoke up the fire, sweetheart," she said to Gretel, "and put your head in the oven to see if it's hot enough." But Gretel did not trust the old witch. "I don't know," she said. "You better check yourself." No sooner had the witch poked her head in the oven than Gretel gave her a huge push and slammed the door shut. Then she hurried to free Hansel. Gathering up the witch's treasures, the children ran from the house, but they did not know which way to turn. "Oh, look," said Hansel suddenly. "It was one little bird that ate my crumbs. She is going to show us the way." The woodcutter could hardly believe his eyes when he saw his children returning. His wife had left. He was all alone. When he saw the treasure that Hansel and Gretel had taken from the witch's house, the woodcutter laughed. "This will only make us comfortable for the rest of our lives," he said. "But you two are my real treasure, and I will never lose you again." Leaping Beauty. Once there lived a king and a queen who had no children. When at last a baby daughter was born to them, they were overjoyed. "I shall give the biggest and best feast ever seen for her," said her proud father. It seemed as though everyone in the kingdom was invited. The most important guests were the 12 fairies who made special wishes for the children. In fact, there were 13 fairies in the kingdom, but in his excitement, the king forgot to invite the last one. At the feast, the 12 fairies gave the little girl the best gifts: beauty and riches and goodness and much more. Just as the 11th fairy had finished her wish, there was a crash as the great door swung open. It was the 13th fairy. "So you felt you didn't need me," she screeched. "Here's my present. On her 15th birthday, the princess will prick her finger on a spindle and die." And she wept from the glittering room as a terrible silence fell. As the guests looked at each other in horror, the 12th fairy spoke. "I cannot take away the curse completely," she said, "but I can make it better. The princess will prick her finger, but she will not die. Instead, she will fall asleep for 100 years. "3 years passed, as years do, and the princess grew up to be clever and kind and beautiful, just as the fairies had promised. On the morning of her 15th birthday, she woke up early and walked out into the castle courtyard. It was a beautiful day. As she walked, the princess suddenly saw the sunlight glinting on a little door that she had never noticed before. She opened it and climbed eagerly up winding stairs inside. At the top of the stairs was an open door, through which a very old woman could be seen as she sat spinning. Now the princess had never seen spinning before, for the king had banished all spindles from the kingdom when he heard the 13th fairy's curse. "What are you doing, good woman?" asked the princess politely. "I am spinning this final thread," answered the woman. "Would you like to try?" And she held the spindle out to the curious girl. "Oh!" cried the princess as she took the spindle. She pricked her finger and immediately fell asleep. At the same moment, everyone in the castle fell asleep. The king and the queen slept in their throne room. The servants slept in the hall. Even the cook and the kitchen dogs into a deep sleep. Many, many years later, exactly 100 in fact, a prince happened to be passing the castle. It was so overgrown with brambles that you could only see the utmost turrets. But as he rode along aside the high, thorny edge, the prince saw something magical. Suddenly, the hedge burst into a bloom. 1,000 roses spread their petals in the sunshine, and the hedge opened to let the prince through. The prince was astonished to see all the sleepers in the castle. At last, he found himself in a small room where the princess herself was sleeping. He was so dazzled by her beauty, and he bent over and kissed her. At that moment, the 100 years came to an end. The princess opened her eyes, and the first thing she saw was a handsome young man smiling down at her. Gently, he led her from the room to the courtyard below, where the whole castle was coming to life. It was not long before the prince and princesses were married, and the king once more gave a great feast. But this time, he was very careful indeed with his invitations. The Frog Prince. Once upon a time, there was a king who had 7 beautiful daughters. The youngest was the loveliest of them all. On sunny days, the youngest princess loved to play with her golden ball in a shady wood beside the castle. The sunlight sparkled through the leaves into a carpool nearby. One day, when the princess threw her golden ball high into the air, something dreadful happened. It fell, splash, into the water and sank to the bottom. "It is lost forever," the girl cried, but a croaky voice interrupted her. "I could dive down and find your ball," said a little green frog by the pool, "if you would promise that I could be your friend and share your meals and snuggle into your little bed at night." "Anything," gasped the princess hastily. Splish! The frog dived into the water and soon reappeared with the golden ball. The princess was so delighted that she forgot all about her promise. She ran straight back to the palace, ignoring that little voice calling from the wood. That evening, the king and his family sat down for supper. Just as they were about to start their meal, their name came a croaking sound at the door. The youngest princess tried to ignore it, but the king noticed that she looked pale. "Who is there?" he asked. Then the princess explained about her promise. "But I can't let a horrible little frog share my supper," she cried. "A promise is a promise, my dear," said the king. "Let us meet your friend." So, although the princess shuddered every time she looked at him, the frog was allowed onto the table to share her supper. After supper, the princess tried to slip off to bed by herself. "What about me?" cried a little voice from the table. The princess tried to pretend that she had not heard, but the king gave her a stern look. "Remember what I said about promises," he said. The princess unwillingly carried the frog to her bedroom and put him down into a corner. "I'd much rather sit on your pillow," croaked the little green creature. Close to tears, the princess picked up the frog and dropped him on to her pillow. At once, the little green frog disappeared. In his place sat a handsome, smiling prince. "Don't be afraid," he said. "A wicked witch put a spell on me that only a kind princess could break. I hope that we can still be friends now that I am no longer a frog." From that moment, the prince and princess became the very best of friends. In fact, a few years later, they had a wonderful wedding, and did not forget to invite some very special little green guests to join the celebrations. The Fisherman and His Wife. One sunny day, a poor fisherman caught a very fine fish. He was just about to unhook it from his line when something odd happened. "Please wait a moment," said the fish. The fisherman rubbed his eyes. A fish that talked. He must be dreaming. But the beautiful silvery fish explained, "I am not really a fish, but an enchanted prince. Please put me back in the water." "Of course," said the fisherman. "I wouldn't dream of eating a talking fish." He put the fish back in the sea and went home to his wife. The fisherman and his wife lived in a rickety old hut near the beach. It was in a terrible state, Everything was a higgly-piggly, and the place had not even been cleaned for a very long time. When the fisherman told his wife about the talking fish, she cried out, "You silly man! You should have asked for something for us in return. Go straight back and ask for a little nice cottage to live in." So the fisherman went back to the seashore. The sun had disappeared behind a cloud. When the fish heard the man's request, he wiggled his fins and said, "Of course, your wish is granted." The fisherman went home, and when he reached the place where his hut used to be, he saw a snug little cottage with roses around the door, and his wife was smiling all over her face. But it was not long before the fisherman's wife began to have other ideas. After a couple of weeks, she nudged the fisherman one night and woke him up. "I deserve better than this," she said. "Go back and ask that fish to give us a castle. I want to be queen." The next day, much against his will, the fisherman did as she asked. There were waves washing angrily against the shore, and thunder was rumbling overhead as the fish listened to his request. "Very well," the fish replied. "Once more, your wish has been granted." This time, when the fisherman trudged home, he found his wife surrounded by servants in an enormous castle. She seemed to be enjoying herself very much. "You should bow to me, husband," she announced. "After all, I am the queen." It was only a few days later that the fisherman's wife frowned at him over the breakfast table. "Being queen is all very well," she said, "but I've been thinking." The fisherman's heart sank, and as he set for seashore, the sea was dark and stormy. Huge waves crashed onto the sand, and lightning forked overhead. "Oh, fish," called the fisherman, "my wife is tired of being queen. Now she wants to be empress of the earth and sky." The fish scales gleamed into the storm. "Go home," he said. "Your wife has all she deserves." And when he reached home, what did the fisherman find? Just a rickety old hut, and his wife inside, complaining. And although he goes down to the shore every morning, the fisherman has not seen the talking fish from that day to this. The Elves and the Shoemaker. There was once a shoemaker who was just so poor that he could not afford to buy enough leather to make shoes to sell. The day came when he had only enough left to make one pair of shoes. Very carefully he cut out the leather and left the pieces on the workbench. Though tired and sad, he went upstairs to bed. The next morning the shoemaker came downstairs to begin work. He was amazed to find that the leather had already been made into shoes, and they were so beautifully made that the shoemaker himself could not have done better. The poor man could not see or understand what had happened, but he proudly put the shoes in his window. Within an hour, a very rich customer had seen the shoes and bought them. In fact, she was so delighted with them that she insisted on paying more than the shoemaker was asking. "Now I have enough money to buy leather for 2 pairs of shoes," the shoemaker told his wife. "I will cut them out tonight, and we shall see what happens." The next morning the shoemaker and his wife could hardly wait to creep down into the workshop. Surely enough, there on the workbench were 2 pairs of dainty shoes. "I've never seen such fine workmanship," gasped the shoemaker. Once again he had no trouble in selling the shoes for a very handsome price. From that day onwards, the shoemaker's troubles were ended. Each evening he cut out leather to make several pretty pairs of shoes. Each morning he found the shoes standing ready on his workbench. Soon everyone knew where the finest shoes in town were found, and the shoemaker's shop was busy with morning till night. One day, near Christmas, as the shoemaker closed the door on his last customer, his wife said, "I've been thinking, my dear, that we should try to find out who has been helping us all this time." The shoemaker agreed. That night, instead of going to bed, he and his wife hid behind the workbench and waited to see what would happen. As the clock struck midnight, the door opened, and then danced two little men. They were dressed in rags, and their feet were bare, but they cheerfully sat down and began to sew. Before dawn, they had finished their work and slipped out into the street. "So now we know," smiled the shoemaker. "What funny little men." "But did you notice, my dear, how old and torn their clothes were?" asked his wife. "Surely the least we can do to thank them is to make them some new trousers and shirts and stockings, and you can make them some little shoes." A few nights later, the tiny presents were finished. The shoemaker and his wife laid them on the workbench and hid as before. Just after midnight, the little men reappeared, and the sight of clothes waiting for them, they danced with happiness. "Now that we are such fine men, we need not come to work again." They sang and then skipped out of the shop, never to return. The shoemaker and his wife were happy and wealthy for the rest of their days, but they never forgot the two little elves who came to them with a helping hand.